Welcome to the Honest Healing Podcast, real talk for cycle breakers. I'm your host, Katie Delamon. If you're ready to speak up, set boundaries, heal your nervous system, and build better relationships, you're in the right place. Because you don't need to be perfect to heal. You just need to be honest. Let's go. Episode 4. Anxiety and stress is not in your head, it's in your breath. In today's episode, I'm joined by Campbell, who is a physiotherapist and a breath expert. We're going to be talking about all things breathing because your breath is the reason you can't relax. No matter how much you meditate, no matter how much you work out, it is your breathing patterns. We talk about how even mindset work can't work unless you're breathing properly. This episode will change how you breathe quite literally. Welcome, Campbell, to the Honest Healing Podcast. Thank you so much for being here. Before we jump into one of my favorite topics in the world, the breath, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and why you're so passionate about it?
Yeah, I would love to. Well, firstly, I'm super excited to be here. I think it's going to be a fun conversation. I grew up in Australia. I always just was fascinated by the human body, honestly. Like when I get this question of like, I was just like, how does this thing work? That we're all inhabiting. And I kind of was toying between the idea of doing physiotherapy or becoming a teacher. And I ended up choosing physiotherapy, but it's kind of interesting that it's come full circle that I'm much more in a teaching role, even though I'm a physiotherapist. And I've just always been exploring like how this thing works and how we can live a better life. And better is very subjective, but I think of this idea of like happy, healthy, vital, doing things we love and being able to do the things we love. And so I'd always just been kind of like, my brain would always just tick as to why do some people struggle and some people not, and what are the changes that we can kind of make. And in more recent years, I've kind of really almost moved away from the entire model that I was taught as a physio, which is very oriented, and this is a byproduct of the medical system, that we have these symptoms and then we get this diagnosis and then that informs this treatment plan, and it's all focused on the problem, right? Although it's fixing the problem, it still reinforces the idea that something's broken. And that just never really sat well with me. And the last couple of years, I've really moved to this kind of health creation model rather than a symptom management model, and just kind of building trust in this capacity that we all have. I think biologically, we're designed to be healthy and happy and vital. And there's a lot of things in the way of that. And I've just found more and more when we remove those constraints, health is the natural emergence of our system. It's the natural kind of byproduct of living in alignment with nature and our own nature. And so my kind of path over the last few years has really just been like, how do we get rid of the things that happen to be in the way of us being healthy? And breath just kind of emerged as this really beautiful access point. And it's not the only thing, but it is one of these really low-hanging fruits that happens to be very high leverage, that these small tweaks and adjustments we can make to the breath seem to have these really outsized impacts on the rest of the systems in the body. And so that's been my obsession for the last 8 or 9 years. And I just continue to dive down this rabbit hole and learn more and more and more. And yeah, it feels like it's a never-ending rabbit hole, which I'm happy about because I love learning and I love sharing this with people.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm a yoga teacher for the past decade, and I am like a broken record. It's every class, I'm like, it's about the breath. It's about the breath. Come back to the breath. And so I am just as passionate about this topic as much as you are. And we'll get into like, obviously the difference between the pranayamas and what's the difference of just breathing and functional breathing, dysfunctional breathing, all that. But so you were a physio, and so you've worked with you were in a hospital setting for a while, right?
Yeah, so I still work as a physio when I'm back in Australia. So we currently live in Hawaii, so out of the country. But when I'm back, I still practice. But the start, as I graduated, my first role was actually a kind of hospital cover. So when any of the other, physios went away, my job was to cover their ward. And so I spent the first year moving between neurosurgery, intensive care, orthopedics. I worked on an oncology ward for a while and really just kind of like dropped into these wards, right, in these different clinical settings. And that was really when I first kind of came up against this idea of dysfunctional breathing. And I always like to kind of highlight, right, at the 5 years of schooling I did to become a physio, we did one lecture on the diaphragm. And it was on neurological injuries, right? Like someone has this nerve that is severed and there's a paralysis, it wasn't on the restoration of breathing and how prominent dysfunctional breathing is. So almost none of what I teach now was taught to me, at school. It's more been this kind of exploration of these different teachers across lots of different settings. But I remember I had this client in this patient in ICU that said to me, like, you're the first person to talk to me about breathing. And it was at end of life and critical care. And I'm like, wait, what? And so that really kind of like gave me a little bit of an itch of like, why isn't this the first thing that we're teaching people rather than the last thing? And
Yep.
I'm very much on that mission because a lot of people turn to breath as a last resort. They've
Yeah.
literally everything except the most fundamental basic process in the body, which is breathing. And I find that so both frustrating and fascinating. That we assume because it's happening all the time that it's too simple that it couldn't be the answer. Yet I have so much evidence, just client after client after client, that when we bring this piece, back into alignment with the system, some really magical things happen. It's like this first domino that we push over, and then it just knocks over all these other dominoes.
Yeah, 100%. I can speak from personal experience. I mean, it's probably multiple things, but I was breathing the wrong way for at least 30 years. So I used to smoke. So when you inhale, you would suck in. When you exhale, you go out. And then I lived in an ashram, and yogis, you learn how to breathe. Inhale, you expand. Exhale, you contract. And I was like, I've been breathing wrong for the past 30 years of my life. And it was so hard for me to breathe properly. And I would just get so frustrated. But like now it's literally the foundation of everything in my life. And I believe it has truly helped heal every area of my life, whether it was something physical like IBS, or whether it was something mental like the anxiety or the emotions. Like it is the one thing that we all have, and we take it for granted so much. And so I'm just like you, so fascinated, but so frustrated at the same time. So, what is the common thread? So you've obviously worked with ICU patients, you've worked with athletes, and then everyday people, right? What's this common thread that you've seen in how the breath impacts not only stress, but also recovery as well? But it was stress and anxiety is the biggest thing, of course.
Yeah. I honestly, and this is maybe my updated thinking, right? Where I like breathing is the most adaptive process in the body. It changes really rapidly, right? Look at anyone that has acute back pain, right? And they hold their breath when they get out of the car, they hold their breath when they pick up the kid, they breathe in a constrained way because otherwise it hurts their back, right? That becomes a baseline really quickly. And so, this idea of kind of understanding what is influencing our breathing and whether we're looking at athletes, CEOs, new moms, right? Like the environment seems to be the common factor, right? And when I talk about the environment, I'm not just talking physical, but let's kind of start with the physical. Most people are sitting more than they ever have, right? Like desk jobs, technology, we sit for meals and transport and all these things. Like we're sitting more than we ever have. Most people are spending more time on their phone than they ever have before because phones are relatively new. Both of those two things directly impact posture, right? Watch anyone sitting on their phone, and it's typically rounded shoulders, head forward, head down, rounded back, right? Anyone at a desk, we have this kind of change in orientation between the rib cage and the pelvis. So, just based on the environment, right, that's influencing our posture, and our breathing kind of conforms to that shape. And so we've got this big input that is resulting in people breathing in a more shallow, up in their chest, right? Just because of the shape of the body. The second one you touched on is stress. We're more stressed than we've ever been because there's just more stuff vying for our attention. We're hyper connected, right? All of the news stories that tend to be negative and scary, right? Like you pull open your phone or you open your laptop, you turn on the TV and it's bad news, right? We can't like I think sometimes we miss this idea that just because I logically know, oh, that's just my phone or that's just my laptop or that's just a news story, even though it's on the other side of the world, my nervous system doesn't have that distinction. My nervous system is responding the same way it always has. And so we are kind of chronically exposed to higher or more stress than we've done before. And my breathing changes based on the stress that I'm under. My breathing is changing in anticipation of taking action, right? But if I'm stressed about my inbox, there's no action to take. And so we have this disruption of my breathing, but then no change in my output, right? I'm not chasing the tiger. I'm not running away from the threat. And so we continually create this disruption. And I think it's so fascinating, right? You look at yogic texts, traditional Chinese medicine, Qigong, right? They all talk about kind of 6 to 8 breaths a minute being this like magic number.
Yep.
And if you go back at medical literature and look at kind of 1800s, 1900s, the average or healthy respiratory rate was 8 to 12 breaths a minute. And then you
Yep.
go through the 1900s and it bumped up to about 10 to 16 breaths a minute. When I went through university, it was 12 to 16. The current healthy normal breathing for an adult is 12 to 20 breaths a minute. That's not normal, right? We just keep moving the goalposts. But that is a direct reflection of how stressed people are, right? Like that high respiratory rate is just a reflection of a nervous system that's under duress.
Yeah.
And because everyone is more stressed and we're seeing everyone breathe quickly, we call it normal.
I
And
know.
it's not, it's common. And so there's these two really big inputs, which is just like the environment that we've designed as humans happens to have a negative impact on our posture and the way we breathe. And then the fact that we're just like chronically stressed by small and big things just on a constant basis results in my breathing kind of ticking up. And the byproduct of those two things is I have a new baseline. That baseline is dysfunctional,
Yep.
right? But because it's a baseline, we don't correct it. And because we keep moving the goalpost, we don't do anything about it. We wait until something really breaks before we fix it instead of actually, preventing it from breaking in the first place.
Yep, totally. And so I've had a lot of people, maybe they have a deviated septum, or maybe they have sleep apnea, or I've had like, somebody with some larger breasts as a woman say, my posture's really bad because my boobs and I can't breathe. So there's all these, like you said, attributes of our posture that are attributed to it. So if somebody were to come to you with those things, what would you suggest?
So it's really, and this is such a really important piece that I found was missing in all of the different breathwork trainings I did. And this is where I do go back to my roots as a physio of assessment and treatment, right? Before we prescribe an intervention, we really need to know what we're working with.
Hmm.
And assessing, like everyone's breath is really unique, right? It's just like a fingerprint. And so rather than giving these blanket prescriptions of like, here's breath work or here's this breathing pattern, right? Is someone's dysfunction resulting from biomechanics? Is it more physiological? Is it a nervous system thing? Is it an emotional thing?
Mm.
That's going to determine what our entry point is. But the model that we teach in our practitioner program is starting with biomechanics. And that kind of opens the door into working with physiology, which then opens the door into the nervous system, which then kind of opens the door into emotional regulation.
Hmm.
So I find for the vast majority of people, it is starting with biomechanics and posture. And that's really coming back to how does the body breathe most efficiently?
Hmm.
And let's actually do this as a little test. Anyone that's listening, right? If you just take a normal or slightly bigger breath than normal, right? Just kind of like feel where that is in your body. And then just try and find a position that allows you to take a bigger, better breath, right? So just kind of follow your body and be like, how would I take a better, bigger, more efficient breath? And I didn't give any postural cues, but most people will have kind of like rolled forward on their pelvis. They would have sat up a little bit taller. They would have stacked their rib cage over their pelvis and they would have tucked their chin a little bit.
Hmm.
And so without any postural cues, everyone intuitively knows what's the right position for me to breathe easily. It
Yeah.
just so happens that most people lack the awareness in their body, right? I'm
Yeah.
slouched at my desk, I'm hunched over my phone. That becomes again a new baseline that I adopt.
Hmm.
But the more, we think of like, how would I breathe easier? It's like we mysteriously find our way into this gorgeous posture, right? With no postural cues. And so to me, it's kind of like, how do we teach someone to refine that position, almost on autopilot? And
Yeah.
that comes from specific kind of corrective practices, right? Maybe someone is a little bit rounded through their spine and they need some extension. Maybe it's my diaphragm is tight because I've been bracing for 20 years, or I did dancing as a young, when I was young and I learned to hold my breath and puff out my chest. Like where I picked up these strategies is different for everyone. But almost to a T, if we invite people back to a position that allows them to breathe more efficiently and then help them find that position more often, their breathing will improve.
Yeah, absolutely. And so You've mentioned it a little bit, but how does the dysfunctional breathing show up in the body and how can we spot it? So would that be like the posture, the biodynamics first?
It's often no, right? This is where it gets super interesting. Almost none of the clients that I work with come to me saying, I have bad breathing,
Yeah,
right?
it's
They come to
usually
me,
emotional, stress, anxiety. Yeah.
I can't switch off. I'm really reactive. I'm snapping at my kids or my partner. I have no energy, right? And so I was actually just writing a piece on this that when we kind of understand these like second order and third order impacts of the breath, we start to see how it impacts my energy production, like at the cellular level. We start to see how it has an influence on my emotional state,
Hmm.
right? And so yes, we want to kind of see, or the most obvious thing is looking at the way that someone breathes. It's like, oh, if your mouth's open, or if I'm seeing your shoulders go up and down, then I know you're using some non-optimal strategies, right?
Yep.
There's no way your diaphragm is making your shoulders go up and down, right? You're using accessory respiratory muscles, and they're kind of designed for emergencies. And so
Mm,
the most obvious is usually the biomechanical, but I find my job is really kind of tying these symptoms or experiences people have, right? My reactivity, my emotional up and down, my lack of energy or my fatigue, tying that back to the way that they're breathing to help them understand why we're addressing breath in the first place. Because I have, I'm a physio, people come to me expecting physiotherapy. And if I jump straight into like, hey, we're going to practice some breathing exercises, yet they came to me for back pain, they might be like, wait, what? You know, but
yeah.
if I can again help them understand, well, like, here's where this thread connects these things, right? You change your breathing because your back hurts, but because you've changed your breathing, that's contributing to your nervous system being stuck in this state. And now you're not sleeping well. And now you're anxious. It's like we start to see that again, that kind of like flow on effect.
Yeah.
We're coming all the way back and addressing what's upstream of a lot of the symptoms, which is often breathing, and
Mm.
kind of bringing that piece back into alignment.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, all of my clients, this is the first I call it the ABCs. I have awareness, then boundaries and compassion, but awareness, like one of the biggest topics is the breath for me. I'm like, you have to be aware of how you're breathing, how it's showing up. And like, you don't have to go to a yoga class every day and you don't have to do pranayama or breath work. It's about functional breathing. Of the 20 to 22,000 breaths a day, what is the quality of them? Because the quality of your breath is going to be the quality of your life, point blank. How do you explain the effects of the nervous system and the differences between the upregulated and the downregulated breathing?
Yeah, this is honestly my favorite question or favorite topic to kind of dive into. And so I always bring it back to like if we consider the breath as a line of communication, right? If we really simplify it down to it is a line of communication between our external environment and our internal environment. My nervous system is always scanning the environment and trying to determine what is the appropriate state for me to be in, right? If I'm running away from something or I see there's a threat in the horizon, right? If we go back like almost evolutionary biology, then I need to change and I need to secrete some cortisol and adrenaline and shut off my digestion and divert blood flow to my limbs so I can run away, right? One of the first tells or the first changes in that line of communication is how I breathe. And so we hear the common example of like the saber-toothed tiger. What happens? A gasp and then breathing quickly, right? And so for depending on which line of thought, but arguably 2 to 4 million years, our breath has been responding unconsciously to the environment and telling my brain, what should I be doing? How should I be responding? What is the appropriate state for me to be in to survive this situation? So that's really like hardwired into my brain. So right now, if both you and I started breathing really rapidly, right, we're going to see a complete shift in our entire autonomic nervous system. My pupils will dilate. I will start to secrete some adrenaline. My heart rate will increase. My brain waves will accelerate, right? Like my body is preparing to take action because that is what a rapid breath has always meant, right? For millions of years. Somewhere along the way, right, in the more recent history, we've learned to manipulate our own breathing. And as far as I can tell, and all the research I've done, we're the only animal on Earth that can change our breath at will, right?
Mhm.
All the other mammals on Earth, their breath, it does change, but again, it's in response, right? The dog's chasing the postman, right? And it's breathing fast, right? Or it's trying to offload heat. But right now, I could breathe as fast as I want. I could hold my breath as long as I could. I could breathe deep, shallow, chaotically, rhythmically. And all of those things have a very predictable change or create a very predictable change in the brain and the nervous system. And
Mm.
so when you take those two pieces, right? One, my brain is kind of hardwired to respond to changes in my breath. And two, I can do whatever I want with my breathing. We have this beautiful recipe to influence the nervous system, right? That, yes, my environment may feel stressful, threatening, right? But if I grab hold of this control wheel and I breathe slow, steady, rhythmical with my nose using my diaphragm, I'm sending a really strong input to my nervous system saying I'm safe, right? If I'm unaware of my breath and I happen to be breathing up into my chest rapidly using my mouth, right? That part of my brain is like, are we ready to run away from something? Is there a threat coming? I need to prepare. So I'm going to kind of shut down anything involved with longevity, recovery, repair, and I'm going to get ready to survive. Most people are unknowingly breathing like they're under threat 22,000 times a day. And
Yeah.
we see the prominence or the prevalence of nervous system dysregulation. And I think a big piece of that is my nervous system is listening to my breath. And my breath is saying we're under threat, right?
Yeah.
Like the body has no choice but to respond to that input. And
Yeah.
so this really common piece that it's like a lot of people are breathing poorly and a lot of people are stuck in a non-optimal nervous system state, right? They're stuck in that sympathetic fight flight. And that happens to be the kind of point where it flows into all of this like chronic disease, right? Anxiety, stress, panic attacks, digestive distress, lack of sleep, right? Emotional dysregulation, all these things kind of hinge upon what state is the nervous system in. And if
Yep.
the nervous system is just responding to breathing, it kind of, in my mind, as simple as like, well, we need to start with the breath to change the channel on the nervous system. So the nervous system can then downregulate these things, upregulate these things, turn off that process, turn on that one, and kind of get the body back into a state where it taps into that natural healing capacity we all have.
Yep. 100%. I always love the quote from Gabor Mate that says, safety is not the absence of a threat, but it's the presence of connection. We're
Ooh.
so disconnected from our breath. We're so disconnected from our bodies. We think that we're alive and we're breathing and we're conscious, that we're paying attention, that we're actually connected. And it's not until you shine light onto it until you're like, oh, I'm actually disconnected. Like you aren't actually paying attention to even maybe 100 of your breaths a day, never mind 20,000 of them. You mentioned a little bit about the diaphragm. So I didn't even know that we had a diaphragm before I went to an ashram and started doing all this yoga. I just thought your ribs moved, by themselves like that. I didn't realize there was this balloon-like structure underneath them. You tell people about the role of the diaphragm and how it obviously plays into our anxiety, our emotional regulation, trauma recovery, all that good stuff.
Yeah, the diaphragm should be everyone's favorite muscle, right? We label it a breathing muscle, and yes, it is heavily involved in breathing, but it is heavily involved in everything,
Mm,
right? I encourage people to kind of consider their diaphragm as like the center point of the universe for their body.
I love
Why?
that.
Well, like, yes, so it draws air in and out of the body, right? By creating a change in pressure in the rib cage, right? The diaphragm descends, the rib cage gets bigger, we pull air in, and that reverses. But straight through the middle of the diaphragm, it's my vagus nerve, right? And this is something that I really love to kind of touch on with people because people hear breath work and it tones the vagus nerve or it downregulates. And yes, but right, if you can breathe slowly and you can extend your exhale, but if you're doing that with improper mechanics, that is going to do nothing for the vagus nerve. It's actually a mechanical stimulus on the vagus nerve, right? It's my diaphragm moving up and down that's kind of tugging on the vagus nerve that's sending a signal to the brain saying downregulate. So if
Mm,
I'm breathing into my chest and my shoulders, I can do the right breathing practice the wrong way, and it is not going to stimulate the vagus nerve. Going straight through the diaphragm is the biggest lymphatic vessel in the body, right? The lymphatic system is a completely passive system in our body. It needs to be moved by muscle contraction and the diaphragm, right? The biggest blood vessel in the body goes straight through the middle of the diaphragm, right? So for me to return blood flow back to the heart, it is pumped by the diaphragm. There's emerging research on cerebrospinal fluid that cleans the brain is pumped by the diaphragm. So we have this really interesting thing where this piece of tissue in the middle of my body that in a healthy person should move about 10 centimeters, right? It's full range. is pumping up and down 20,000 times a day. And I encourage people, because people have got a pretty good like mechanical mind, right? You got your car. Imagine there was this piston that was meant to move 10 centimeters 20,000 times a day, and it was only moving 1 centimeter. What's going to happen, right? Like this pipe's going to back up, that thing's going to break. And so the diaphragm is so, so important, not just for breathing, but for managing pressure and fluid in my body, right? And now it even like it extends further beyond this, because like what happens when you try to hold in tears, right? Brace your diaphragm. What happens when you are frightened? You brace your diaphragm. What happens when you're bracing for impact or, preparing for pain? Brace your diaphragm. And so we start to see this really like emotional side of things, where a lot of these heightened emotional states are tied to what am I doing with my diaphragm? I've had so many people on the table in front of me, and I release their diaphragm and they have this massive outpouring of emotions. And they're like, what's going on? I'm so sorry. I don't know what's happening. I'm like, I do. You
Wow.
hold so much stuff here, right? And we've just kind of freed that up. And so, whatever angle you look at it from, the diaphragm is just this critical piece, right? That influences everything else. And so just to see it as a breathing muscle, I think misses the potential of like, oh, I should really like learn to get in touch with this part of my body, because improving the way that my diaphragm moves more or less improves every other function in the body. As grand as that sounds, right? It does.
Yeah. Yeah. I always think about like footy players, especially like here in Australia, like the NRL, AFL, like they literally you can hear the like through the whole, and I'm like, oh my God, their diaphragms. Like, never mind their brains, but like their diaphragms would be just getting, oh my God, killings.
Absolutely.
I mean,
And it's
in a sense though, would it stretch it a little though?
it and this is where it gets super interesting, right? Like back pain is so, so common, right? I know the statistic from the US. I'm sure it's probably similar in most Western worlds, but like 8 in 10 adults will struggle with back pain in their lifetime,
Yeah.
right? And again, if you've ever experienced back pain, you know what happens to your breath, right? You use your diaphragm to brace and create pressure and kind of like hold your spine where it is. I just a couple of weeks ago tweaked my back. I was like playing with my son and fell off this beam, and it's amazing what happened to my breathing, right? This wasn't a conscious, intentional thing. My body is kind of like compensating, right? And trying to protect itself. And so we see this like really high prevalence back pain. You think of like sporting injuries, particularly things like rugby, footy, right? Like I work with I'm working with a footy player right now who's just like, oh, I've had like 10 bouts of like bad back injuries. And his diaphragm does not move. Like it is one of the most, like it's a brick wall. And lo and behold, he's like just out of the blue panic attacks about a year ago, and has struggled with having like 5, 10 panic attacks a day since then. Been on this roller coaster trying to find specialists, right? And I'm like, had really bad back and neck injuries from high school all through his footy career. When I look at his breathing, like it's literally like up in his neck and his head, because his diaphragm is so braced to try and hold his spine together that he's getting none of that vagal stimulation, right? And so we again see this impact of like beyond the mechanics, like what is that doing to the nervous system when the diaphragm stops moving? Because it's learned to protect the spine, right? And so, but that guy, right, luckily got referred through a few other physios and came to see me about his breathing, but most people don't, right? Most people struggle with panic attacks or anxiety, even in the history of a back injury. No one's really looking at the way they breathe. And that's, yeah, I mean, we're on the same page here in terms of just like this needs to be like first and foremost in people's mind, because it's so, so important.
Okay, so how can someone start a breathwork practice today, especially if they are overwhelmed and most definitely skeptical?
Yeah, wonderful question. And it's not the answer anyone wants, but it has to start with awareness, right? Without awareness, we're just like throwing shit at the wall and seeing what sticks.
Hmm.
And so many people jump. You were talking about the ABCs. I teach a model of ACO, which is awareness, control, optimization. A
Hmm.
lot of people, when they come to breath work, are jumping straight into control or optimization without first building this muscle of like, what do I even need to work on? Right? It's like, oh, breathe in, do box breathing. It's like, wait, what? But we haven't established what's going on in your breath in the first place. So I really encourage people to both have a formal and informal practice of awareness. By
Hmm.
form, I mean set a timer for 5 minutes, sit down and try and watch your breathing. Just see what part, like no judgment, no right, wrong, no good, bad. Get in touch with this process that is happening 25,000 times a day, that by nature is kind of relegated to the background. My brain doesn't want to notice every single breath, right? There's way too many things going on. And so it kind of is relegated. But when I pay attention, when I shine this little spotlight on my breath, I actually make that part of my brain more active, right? I'm becoming more attuned to my breathing. And this is the kind of groundwork of then knowing what do I do with my breath to change how I'm feeling, right? So the formal piece of like sit down for a couple of minutes, 1 or 2 times a day, and just try and not do anything other than observe how your breath is moving. And then the informal or the opportunistic is like, hey, next time you're feeling anxious, how are you breathing? Just notice it. What is different about that versus when you're feeling calm and you notice how you're breathing? Hey, next time you're feeling super excited, next time you're feeling upset by something, next time you're feeling frustrated, when you have this, I'm feeling X, I encourage people to then be like, and how am I breathing based on that state? And we're developing a bit of a repertoire, right? Of like, oh, this is what my anxious breath looks like. This is what my excited breath looks like. This is what my scared breath looks like. And when I establish those little kind of checkpoints, or these, I call them the flag in the sand, it's like
Hmm.
when I'm feeling anxious, I can then do the calm breathing because I know what my calm breathing feels like. Because when I'm calm, I go, how am I breathing? It's like, oh, it feels like this part of my body's moving. I feel this way, right? And I can adopt that pattern when I need it. But
Hmm.
if I come straight to like teach me how to breathe so I feel calm, well, I might not know when to do that because I
Hmm.
didn't notice my breath veering off course and like here's my anxious breath happening. So I get people to really kind of build this muscle of awareness. A lot of the clients that come to me are, it's like first session, they're expecting to walk away with a bunch of breathwork protocols. I'm like, the next week, you're doing nothing but pay attention,
Yep.
right? It's often not the sexy, cool answer that people want, right? But if people want to really build change, they have to start with noticing what's actually going on in the first place.
Yep.
So starting with awareness and establishing these different versions of breath that I have based on the state that I'm in allows me to kind of reverse engineer and enter into those states at will when I actually use that same breathing pattern.
Yep.
And then this thing would be, this is just common across the board because people sit and use their phones, right? It would be getting back to improving the way that they use their diaphragm. And so that can be done through many different ways, but the two that I find most effective, number one is kind of doing like a self manual release. And that's as simple as taking my fingers and kind of like finding the bottom of my rib cage and kind of dipping the fingers under and up and trying to massage and loosen up and just free up the motion of my diaphragm. And
Yep.
then the second thing is trying to retrain my breathing pattern. So I encourage everyone, if they're listening to this, lay down on your stomach on the floor, right? Cross your forearms, put your forehead on your forearms. So you're just laying nice and flat. We've kind of changed where gravity and the lines of force in the body, and the belly is going to come up against the floor, right? So we can't really do this big belly breath, right? We have to kind of breathe backwards into the spine and sideways into the ribs. So laying on your front and just trying to breathe from front to back and from side to side is the easiest way to kind of like make it easier for the diaphragm to work efficiently. It's
Hmm.
hard to recruit the muscles of your neck and your chest while you're laying on your stomach, right? It's far easier to recruit your diaphragm. And so we want to kind of like put the body in a position that makes it easy to do the thing we want well,
Hmm.
rather than, right? Someone's breathing up into their neck 20,000 times a day and they've been doing that for 20 years. And we just say, breathe with your diaphragm. They're like, I thought I was, or I don't know how to do that, right? They're so predisposed to keep using the muscles they've always been using and the pattern they've always been using. And so it really works to kind of change the paradigm a little bit and put you in a different position and start to kind of like reawaken the diaphragm. So loosen it off, start turning it back on, and then building that on top of awareness is kind of where everyone should start in my mind.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I'm with you. I used to teach just my 12-week mindfulness courses where every single day for 12 weeks, that's all you're doing is just paying attention. And honestly, like mindfulness is the thing that really it clicked, like something inside of me just clicked, like mind, like I thought I was aware my whole life. And then I was like, oh, I've never been aware ever. Like this is actually what awareness is. And paying attention in the present moment without judgment. It's like, okay. thought it was doing that, absolutely wasn't. And just out of curiosity, what is your go-to like breathing exercise or breathing pattern? Because I know that I personally have a few, but I'm just wondering what yours are.
Yeah, it kind of changes depending on the day, really.
Yeah. Or what the situation is. Like, do I want to slow it down? Do I want to, yeah.
Yeah, but to answer that question in a way that kind of gives other people a starting point, for me, like the simplest practice and the arguably the most beneficial is resonance frequency, which is this kind of 40 to 60 ratio, right? So if we keep the math really simple, if I breathe in for 4 seconds and I breathe out for 6 seconds, that's going to make me breathe 6 times a minute. And for a big portion of the population, that's this kind of sweet spot that increases heart rate variability, increases vagal tone. It kind of like syncs up the heart and the brain. Like all this beautiful stuff happens. Now, it's different for everyone. Like my rate of resonance frequency is more like a 6 second inhale and a 9 second exhale. So it's about 4 breaths a minute rather than 6 breaths a minute. But there's a way people can kind of find what their sweet spot is. And if it's like, trying to avoid the confusion of 50 different breathwork practices, this is the one, again, for the 21st century human. It's like most people today have a lot of stress, are overwhelmed. There's a lot of stuff going on. So, like 10 minutes, once or twice a day of breathing in this way, again, considering the line of communication, is kind of flooding my brain and nervous system with the idea of right now, I'm safe. Right now, I'm supported. I'm okay. There's not, it's like, and a lot of people don't have even a moment of that, right? Because even when they're laying on the couch watching Netflix, they're breathing up into their chest 20 times a minute, right? Even when they're taking a break, they're on their phone, So like there's just so little of this time where the nervous system actually receives this input that says there's nothing for us to do, there's nothing for us to worry about, we're good, right? So I think that's the one for me. Like we got a 9-month-old and a 3-year-old at the moment. Like our kids are kicking our ass, right? In terms of like lack of sleep, and we're traveling, and it's like that's the one. It's just like at least once or twice a day, I need to tell my nervous system we are good.
Yep.
Because the other 23 hours of the day, we're not. Like it's just like mayhem. And so
Yep.
that's the I think that works for most people is just finding that slow, rhythmical, intentional breath. The exhale's a little bit longer,
Yep.
and sitting with that for 5 or 10 minutes is going to do most people wonders.
Yep. I wholeheartedly agree. I feel like we all want this shiny, glamorous, like way of healing, but really the healing is just being mindful and having functional breathing. Like, and it's the thing that you have 24/7, you have access to it, it's completely free, and it's the one thing that will change your life. And yeah, so what are the misconceptions about breath work? You would get so many about this, so many
Yeah,
skeptics.
I think the misconceptions, some of the biggest ones, right? Like too simple, so it doesn't work. Like how could that be the answer? I've seen 10 specialists and I've done all these different things, and you're telling me just to change the way I breathe. Like, come on. So the idea that something so simple could be so effective is probably the predominant one. The next I would see is more kind of like on the clinical side of things, but it just gets discounted because it's something we're already doing, right?
Mhm.
So I work a lot with other practitioners, other physios, chiros, doctors, dentists, right? And teaching this model of assessing and treating breathing. But I often come up against this kind of skepticism of like, but that's just happening. Like, why would we even need to focus on breathing, right? It just runs itself in the background.
Mhm.
So the idea that like it doesn't need attention, it's just looking after itself is probably another really big one. And then the third one I would say is like breath work is experiential breath work, right? It's 50 people in a hall with no lights and a pounding drum, and they're hyperventilating until everyone screams. Like
Yeah,
that rubs me the wrong way.
me
And I have
too.
to, when I entered into the world of breathwork, I was very much in that experiential sense, right? I did the Wim Hof method. I went and climbed a mountain with him, and they're very like intense sessions,
Hmm.
and they're super powerful for me. But all it took was to watch one person, right? I actually supported Wim at his kind of like world tour, and there's 1,000 people in this warehouse in Sydney doing the Wim Hof method. And I watched just numerous people having panic attacks and breakdowns, and it's just like destabilize their entire system. So
Yep.
this idea of breathwork needs to be hard, fast, and intense is something that I think is a belief that needs to be broken. I explain to our practitioners, right? There's many ways up the mountain, right? Intensity is one of them.
Hmm.
And it's kind of the easiest one because you can fly over good mechanics and establish good physiology, and you can just like blast yourself into oblivion. And some people will have this really transcendent moment. They're like, breathwork's amazing. but a lot of people won't, right?
Very few. Like this is the thing. Like so many people go to these breathwork workshops, or they do ayahuasca, or all these intense big things, or even like I always encourage people to do 10-day silent retreats for Vipassanas. It really shifted something in my life, and my life has never been the same. But I always tell people like it's not going to change your life. You
Yeah,
change your life by all the small things that you do every day. Like it's not about the day you get married or the job or the kid. It's about how you brush your teeth, how you put the dishes away. It's like all these small micro moments that you're doing all the time that are so boring and minute. Like it's how you do that is how you do
yeah,
everything. And that will change your life. Like, yes, of course, these modalities and these healing remedies, I've done them all, and they've all helped me in some way, shape, or form. But what they really did was just make me trust myself more. That's it. Like build more self-trust that like I got this, I know what I'm doing, and I'm on the right path. Like
yeah.
that's all.
And to me, it was really evident, right? I would run a Wim Hof method workshop, once or twice a month in Cairns. And I had a few people come back, right? And that day, like, they did the workshop. They were like, "Oh my God, this is life changing." Like it was just, I've never felt this way. I'm just so. They'd come back 2 weeks later, and they're like, "Oh, by Tuesday, I was anxious again." Like the workshop was on Sunday, and then like so they're back 2 weeks later to do the workshop again. And I was like, "Wait, right? If this was so powerful, people wouldn't need to come back every 2 weeks." And
Mhm.
that's when I really started to cotton onto the idea of it's like, cool, you could do this like amazing transformational thing, but if you go back to shitty breathing on Monday 25,000 times a day, like you're just going to feel the same way. Like we didn't correct anything. There
Mhm.
was no restoration, there was no identification of what's wrong. Like, and that's when I really started to veer away from the big experiential transformational stuff and just zoomed in on like helping people correct their breathing because that's what I saw moving the needle, where it's like once I help you change the way you breathe
Mhm.
every single day, your anxiety went away. It's
Yep.
like it wasn't because we blast you off and you had this transcendent moment, but then you went back to breathing up into your chest 20, it's like 20 times a minute. It's like we didn't do anything to correct the problem. We just like overrode it for a little bit, for a couple of hours.
Put a band-aid
And
on
so,
it. It's like taking a pill.
yeah, right. So like that idea that breath work has to be strong, hard, and intense for it to be effective
Mm.
does not. Right? Like it's a really thin slice of the pie. And I don't want to make it sound like there is no validity, or value in,
Mm.
transformational styles of breath work. Like I've seen it change lives as well. And it's been hugely
Absolutely.
tough for me, but it's built on top of this foundation, which is healthy breathing.
Yep. Yep. The functional breathing. So I guess I'll just end last question. How does breath work intersect with modalities like the physio, the mindfulness, the meditation? You know, how does it intersect?
Best question. And this is why, I mean, I feel so strongly about, I really want to kind of frame this answer the right way, right? It should be like, I wouldn't even say it connects these things as it is underneath them, right?
It's the
You
foundation.
can do all of the mindset work in the world, but if your nervous system is dysregulated due to breathing, it's not going to change anything, right? You can have the best nutrition, you can do the best sleep stuff, you can do all these things, right? And so, whether you're a doctor, a dentist, a physio, a chiro, a yoga teacher, a health coach, a movement practitioner, every single person you work with is breathing, and most of them are breathing poorly. And so, rather than seeing breath work as this kind of like wellness add on, it's like, oh, here's this other modality that I can add to my toolkit and I can lead some breath work sessions. I think it should be a central pillar, or what I like to refer to as a lens that you look through, right? I'm biased on this, but I think every single health practitioner in the world should learn to look through the lens of breath,
Mhm.
right? It helps you immediately identify whether or not it's worth introducing any other modality, or are you just introducing things on top of a shaky foundation,
Yep.
right? And you might assess someone like their breathing is great. Cool, move on to the next thing, right? We don't have to beat the dead horse or whatever the saying is, right? But for a lot of people that are breathing poorly, we need to kind of create the solid foundation at the level of physiology and the nervous system before we can use all these other wonderful tools. And so, in my mind, it's not a comparison of like breathwork versus therapy or breathwork versus anything else. It's like, can we reestablish healthy functional breathing to kind of reorganize the entire system so it has capacity to take on all these other wonderful tools? Like, I love working when we have practice in our practitioner program when therapists come in, right? It's because like, oh, you already have these wonderful top-down tools,
Hmm.
but all the therapists that come into our program are like, my clients still struggle with anxiety, and I'm helping them kind of manage the problem, but I don't feel like I'm fixing it, right? So when we can kind of like fix this input to the nervous system and create that solid foundation, guess what? All those mindset tools and reframes and change, it's like they all work exponentially better, like because someone has the capacity to integrate, implement these things. And so rather than it kind of connecting, I think it's this underneath, it's kind of the floor upon which everything else needs to be built.
Yeah. It's the connection to yourself. It's, yoga means to yoke or to union with yourself. Like it is that. It's that foundation of connection to yourself. I couldn't be more passionate about this as well, Campbell. And thank you so much for your time and your wisdom, your expertise. I would love for people to know where they can find you and what you offer.
Yeah, best place is probably Instagram. That's where I'm most active, at Breath Body Therapy. And I always just encourage people, it's like, it's me on that, like reach out. If you are a skeptic, I love the skeptics, right? I love the people being like, oh, all that stuff you talked about is really good. But, so if you feel there's an inherent skepticism, like let's have a conversation, because that to me is the most rewarding when someone kind of like has this resistance and they think it's too simple or it can't work for them, right? And most people's exposure to breathwork, in my experience, has been the experiential stuff,
Yeah.
right? And this is a very different approach. So if anyone does have questions, if they want to, chat about how this works, then of course reach out.
Yeah. Sweet. Well, thank you again for your time and enjoy the East Coast.
Thanks, Katie.
If you're interested in learning more on how to breathe properly, how to integrate it into your life, how to regulate your nervous system, how to put up boundaries, how to add more self-compassion, my one-to-one coaching is for you. If you want to know if I'm the right fit for you, let's jump on a free strategy call. All the details are on my website, www.katiedelamont.com, and you can always find me on any social media platform as my name, Katie Delamont. Look forward to connecting with you there.